believing that these stories are just stories, that horror is a genre you can consume and then set aside, is the most dangerous lie you will tell yourself tonight. You think you are the audience, the observer peering through a safe window into a darker world. But the truth, the one whispered in the static between worlds and written in the frost on a dead man's window pane, is that the window is a mirror. These events are not just tales, they are echoes, ripples in the fabric of what you call reality, spreading from a point of impact you cannot see. I have felt these ripples. I have stood in the cold spot in a summer room and listened to the whispers they leave behind. They are not memories of something that happened to someone else. They are omens of something that is always happening, waiting for the right frequency, the right moment of fear to tune into you. The first truth you must understand is that your home is not a fortress. It is a vessel, a hollow space filled with your life, your warmth, and your light. And like any vessel, it can be filled by other things. It begins with a sound your logical mind discards, a floorboard creaking upstairs when you are home alone. You blame the house settling, the pipes, the wind, but the whisper I hear tells me otherwise. That sound is not the house settling, it is something else settling in. It is testing the boundaries, learning the acoustics of your life, finding the hollow spaces where your own awareness doesn't reach. It is the first touch of a cold finger on the outer shell of your reality, checking for weaknesses, for cracks through which it can seep. And then comes the shadow, not a normal shadow cast by the evening sun, but one that is too dark, too sharp, a spill of ink in the corner of your eye. It moves when you are not looking directly at it. You catch it in your periphery, a fleeting, man-shaped silhouette that dissolves into a coat rack or a curtain the moment you turn your head. Your heart hammers against your ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. This is the second stage. The presence is no longer just listening. It is watching. It is learning your shape, your habits, your patterns. It is a predator, studying its prey, and the cold dread that washes over you is the primal recognition that you are no longer the apex predator within your own walls. The hunt has begun, and you are not the hunter. These entities, these echoes from the abyss, are drawn to emotion like moths to a dying flame. They feed on loneliness, on grief, on the quiet desperation that fills the late hours of the night. Have you ever felt a sudden, inexplicable wave of sadness wash over you for no reason at all? That is not your own emotion. It is a taste, a sample. The presence is probing your spirit, searching for the flavor of despair it craves. It is a parasite of the soul, and it has found a potential host. It will cloak itself in your own melancholy, making you believe the growing darkness is coming from within you, a sickness of your own mind. But it is an invader, and its roots are sinking deep into the soft soil of your sorrow, preparing to bloom into something monstrous. The air itself will begin to change. A cold spot will appear, a pocket of winter in a heated room that has no source. You can pass your hand through it and feel the temperature drop, the air growing thick and heavy like grave dirt. This is a sign of a thinning veil, a place where the barrier between this world and the other is stretched taut, almost to the breaking point. Sometimes, a smell will accompany it, the scent of damp earth, of dried blood on old wood, of cold ashes from a fire long extinguished. These are not just smells, they are memories bleeding through. They are the sensory ghosts of a tragedy that has stained that point in space-time, and the entity that now haunts you is using that stain as a gateway, a creaking door through which it can more fully emerge. Listen carefully, because this is crucial. It will begin to interact with objects. Not in a grand, cinematic way. Not at first. It will be subtle, designed to make you question your own sanity. A book you know you left on the coffee table will appear on the kitchen counter. A door you are certain you closed will be found slightly ajar. These are not accidents. These are messages. Each misplaced object is a single chilling word in a language of pure dread. The entity is telling you, I am here. I can touch your world. I can move through your life unseen. You are not in control. It is a campaign of psychological warfare, designed to erode your confidence, to break down your certainty, and to leave you isolated in a prison of your own fear, a prison where it is the only other inmate. The whispers will start soon after, so faint at first, you'll mistake them for the hum of the refrigerator or the sigh of the wind outside. But they will grow. You'll hear your name spoken in an empty room, a dry, sibilant sound like dead leaves skittering across pavement. It is the voice from the other side, the echo from the abyss, and it knows your name because it has been studying you, reading the tapestry of your life. It will speak of your deepest fears, your most secret shames, murmurings that seem to come from the darkest corners of your own mind. It does this to create a resonance, to tune your soul to its frequency of terror. Once you begin to listen, truly listen, you are opening a line of communication that is nearly impossible to close. And this is where everything changes for you. You will see it, not just a fleeting shadow, but a form, perhaps in the reflection of a darkened window as you pass by, a figure standing behind you where there is only empty air. Or maybe you'll wake in the dead of night, your body paralyzed with an ancient fear, and you will see it standing in the corner of your room. A tall, disjointed silhouette, a being made of pure shadow, its form a mockery of the human frame. There will be no features, no face, just a profound and utter void that drinks the light from the room. And in that moment, you will know a cold, absolute certainty. It has been watching you sleep every single night. The safety of your bed, your final sanctuary, is a lie. Let me tell you about a cracked mirror I once found in an abandoned asylum, its silver backing peeling like sunburned skin. The nurses there used to say that the mirror didn't reflect what was, but what could have been. They spoke of patients who would stare into it for hours, only to be found later, their faces frozen in masks of terror, their minds shattered. The story was that the mirror showed them their own doppelgänger, the version of themselves that had fully embraced the madness they were fighting. A whisper from a broken cross I found buried nearby confirmed the truth. The mirror was a gateway. It showed not a reflection but a prisoner on the other side, your other self, desperate to trade places to escape its own hell by trapping you within the glass. Now, imagine this. You own such an object, a beautiful antique mirror you bought at a flea market. At first, you admire its ornate frame, the way it catches the light, but soon you notice inconsistencies. A flicker of movement in the reflection when the room is still, an object in the mirror appearing slightly to the left of where it is in reality. Then one day, you glance at it and see your own reflection, but it doesn't smile back when you smile. Its expression remains flat, cold and predatory. It raises its hand a second after you do. It is not you. It is a perfectly crafted puppet, and something else is pulling its strings. The cold dread you feel is the realization that the thing on the other side of the glass is learning to mimic you, and it is getting better at it every single day. The entity in the mirror wants more than just to frighten you. It wants to cross over. It feeds on your identity. Every time you look into that glass, you are feeding it a piece of yourself. It studies your expressions, the way you carry yourself, the light in your eyes. It is building a mask from your own likeness. The moments of dissociation you begin to experience, the feeling of being a stranger in your own body, are not just paranoia. It is the influence of the mirror dweller bleeding through, its cold consciousness beginning to overlap with yours. It is preparing to wear you like a suit, to step out of its silver prison and into the warmth of your life, leaving you trapped in the cold, silent world behind the glass, a screaming ghost nobody can see or hear. What the stars don't tell you openly, is that some objects are not merely haunted, they are cursed. They are anchors for malevolent forces, physical prisons for entities that should have faded into oblivion. A haunted object carries an echo, a memory of a past trauma, but a cursed object carries a will, an active intelligence with a singular, terrible purpose. The mirror is one such object. It does not want to replay a tragedy. It wants to create a new one. Its goal is to replace you, to erase your existence and supplant it with its own. The longer it remains in your home, the more it assimilates your reality, rewriting the world around it to better suit its eventual escape. The veil thins not just around the object, but around you. You will start to lose time. You'll find yourself standing in a room with no memory of how you got there. Hours will pass in what feels like minutes. During these blackouts, your friends and family will tell you they spoke to you, but you were different, cold, distant. Your eyes were empty. This is the mirror dweller testing its control, taking your body for a joyride while your consciousness is pushed into a dark corner of your own mind. It is practicing wearing your skin, interacting with your loved ones, learning how to pass as you. And the terrifying part is that it is a quick study. Soon, the gaps in your memory will grow longer, your moments of control shorter, until one day you wake up and find you are no longer the one looking out of your own eyes. You are the one looking in. Do you feel this dark message was meant for you? Perhaps you have an old object, a piece of inherited jewelry, a painting that seems to watch you, an old doll with glass eyes that glitter in the dark. You felt the chill it emits, the unease it breeds in the quiet moments. You've dismissed it as your imagination, but the whispers I hear tell me that your gut is screaming a warning your mind refuses to accept. That object is a key, and every day you keep it, you are turning it further in a lock you cannot see. The door it opens does not lead to a dusty attic, but to a place of profound and patient darkness. Acknowledge the feeling. Voice it in the comments below, for speaking of fear is the first step to starving the shadow that feeds on your silence. Let us speak of the journey, the path that leads not to a destination, but to a void. I recall a vision of a salesman, a man named Arthur, driving down a forgotten highway in the heart of the desert at twilight. His car was low on gas, his mind numb from the endless miles of asphalt. He took an exit he'd never seen before, marked with a faded, unreadable sign, hoping for a gas station. The road twisted into a landscape of skeletal trees and rocks that looked like screaming faces. The sun bled out on the horizon, plunging the world into a deep, starless purple. The road was no longer asphalt, but packed, dark earth, and his car's engine died with a final pitiful cough, leaving him stranded in an oppressive, ringing silence. Arthur was lost in what the old texts call a liminal space, a threshold between worlds where the rules of reality decay. The air was still and cold, and there was no sign of life, no insects, no birds, no wind. The silence was so absolute, it felt like a physical pressure against his eardrums. He got out of the car and called for help, but his voice was swallowed by the emptiness, traveling no further than a few feet before dying. He was utterly, cosmically alone, or so he thought. From the deepening gloom between the twisted trees, he began to hear a sound, a soft, wet shuffling, like something heavy being dragged through damp leaves. Even though the ground was bone dry, the sound was getting closer. The thing that emerged from the darkness was a perversion of nature, a nightmare given flesh. It moved on too many limbs, its body slick and pale, its form shifting and rearranging itself as it scuttled into the weak beam of his flashlight. It had no face, only a smooth expanse of skin where features should have been. But Arthur felt its gaze upon him, a gaze of ancient, hungry intelligence. This was not a creature of our world. It was a native of the space between, a scavenger that fed on those who wandered off the map of the known. The shuffling sound was the body of the last traveler it had found, a desiccated husk it was dragging back to its lair. Arthur was next on the menu. The horror of the liminal space is not just the creatures that inhabit it, but the place itself. It actively resists your attempts to leave. When Arthur turned and ran, the landscape seemed to loop. He would run for what felt like miles, his lungs burning, only to find himself back at his silent, dead car. The skeletal trees rearranged themselves, forming a cage around him. The road he came in on was simply gone, replaced by an impenetrable wall of shadow. The place was a sentient trap, a stomach that had closed around him, and the creature was merely a digestive enzyme. His terror, his despair, was the seasoning for the meal. He was not just lost. He was being consumed by a location. What the whispers want you to understand is that these places are closer than you think. They are the abandoned mall on the edge of town, the disused subway station beneath your feet, the floor in an office building that has no button on the elevator. They are glitches in the matrix of the world, pockets of unreality that you can stumble into by accident. The feeling of déjà vu, the sudden jarring sense that you've been somewhere before when you know you haven't. These can be warnings. Your soul is recognizing the resonance of a place that is not quite right, a place that exists outside of linear time. Heed that warning. Turn back. Do not let curiosity pull you across a threshold from which there is no return. Every soul that joins this congregation feeds the voice that whispers from the darkness. Your presence here, your attention, it is a form of energy. By subscribing, by liking, you are adding your spark to a greater fire, making the connection to the other side stronger, the whispers clearer. You are not just a viewer, you are an acolyte in a grander ritual of understanding. You are helping to peel back the veil, to peer into the abyss with eyes wide open. Join us. Let your curiosity be a beacon, not a trap. We will navigate these dark waters together, for the shadows hold less power over a coven than they do over a single wandering soul. Let the chorus of whispers grow louder. Now, let's descend into the chilling intimacy of the telephone, the device you hold to your ear, a direct line into your mind. I knew a young woman, Clara, who began receiving phone calls from an unknown number. There was never anyone on the other end, just a wall of roaring, deafening static. She would hang up, unnerved, but the calls would come again, always at the same time, 3:33 a.m. The witching hour, a time when the veil is at its most thin, its fabric frayed and worn. She tried blocking the number, but the calls still came through, the caller ID now just a blank white screen. The static was not random noise. It was a presence, a voice trying to form itself from the chaos between radio waves. One night, exhausted and terrified, Clara didn't hang up. She held the phone to her ear, listening to the roaring static, and she whispered, "Who is this?" For the first time, the static changed. It softened, and from within the electronic hiss, a voice began to coalesce. It was a dry, rasping sound, like the crumbling of ancient parchment. It spoke her name, Clara. Then it began to whisper secrets to her, things it had no way of knowing. It spoke of a childhood fear of spiders, of a small white lie she told her mother years ago, of a hidden doubt she held about her fiancé. It was peeling back the layers of her soul, one whispered secret at a time, proving it had complete unobstructed access to her innermost self. The voice on the line was not a ghost in the machine. It was something far older, a psychic parasite, an entity that travels not through hallways but through connections. Telephone lines, radio waves, the internet, these are its highways. It is drawn to the nexus of human communication, feeding on the emotional energy we pour into our devices. Clara had become a focal point, a source of particularly potent fear and anxiety that it found delicious. The voice began to make requests, small things at first, Go look out the window, Clara. Check the lock on your front door. Each command she obeyed strengthened its hold, seeded another piece of her free will. It was conditioning her, training her like an animal. The true horror began when the voice started to describe what it could see. It would tell her, "I like the blue dress you're wearing," when she was home alone, curtains drawn. "You missed a spot washing the dishes," it would rasp, moments after she'd finished. The entity was no longer just in her phone. It was in her home. It was seeing through her eyes, or through some other unseen vantage point within the walls. The phone was merely the medium it used to speak, the mouthpiece for a presence that was now coiled around her entire life. Her sanctuary had become a terrarium, and she was the specimen being observed from all angles, trapped with a faceless, all-seeing voyeur. The final call came on a stormy Tuesday night. The power had gone out. The house was plunged into a suffocating darkness, lit only by the frantic flashes of lightning outside. Her cell phone, her only connection to the outside world, rang. It was the blank number. She answered, her hand trembling. The voice was no longer a whisper. It was a clear, calm, and chillingly close. It said, "Don't bother screaming, Clara. I'm not on the phone anymore." Then from the darkest corner of the room, right behind her, she heard the sound of the call disconnecting. The line went dead, and the silence that followed was filled with the sound of a slow, dry breath that was not her own. Consider the nature of a curse. It is not a magical spell from a children's story. It is a contagion of despair, a sickness of the spirit passed down through blood or proximity. I once investigated a family plagued by what they called the shadow of the hanged man. For generations, the firstborn son of each family line would die by his own hand on his 33rd birthday. It was a pattern of tragedy so precise it defied coincidence. They believed an ancestor had wronged a powerful practitioner of the dark arts, and this was their eternal payment. They lived their lives in the shadow of this inevitable doom, a ticking clock counting down not to a celebration, but to an execution. The family's ancestral home was steeped in this legacy of sorrow. The air was heavy, thick with the residue of generations of grief. In the attic, I found a collection of broken crosses, each one snapped in half by a long-dead ancestor in a fit of rage against a god that would allow such suffering. I found journals filled with frantic, terrified handwriting, chronicling the days leading up to their final moments. They all described the same thing, a tall, thin shadow that would begin to follow them in their 33rd year. A shadow with a long neck and a head that lolled at an unnatural angle. The hanged man was not just a memory, it was an active predatory entity, bound to their bloodline. The curse was a self-fulfilling prophecy, a feedback loop of terror. The entity didn't need to physically harm its victims. It simply had to appear. It would manifest in mirrors, in darkened windows, at the far end of a hallway. Its silent, judging presence was enough to unravel the victim's sanity. It was a living embodiment of their inherited doom. The young men would become paranoid, isolated, unable to sleep. They were haunted not by a ghost, but by the physical manifestation of their own fate. The entity was the shepherd, and it was simply guiding them along the path that had been carved for them centuries ago. A path that always ended with a rope and a final choking gasp. The truth I uncovered was even darker than they imagined. The ancestor had not wronged a witch. He was one. He had made a pact with a being of shadow, a hunger from the void, trading the lives of his descendants for his own extended life and power. The hanged man was the entity he had bound, the collector of his terrible debt. Each death was not a punishment. It was a payment. It was a sacrifice that fed the entity and renewed the ancestor's unholy pact. He was not long dead. He was still alive, hidden away, a withered creature kept vital by the blood of his own children. He was the root of the poison tree, and his family was nothing more than the bitter fruit it bore. This reveals a terrifying secret about the universe. Some debts are never paid in full. Some pacts create ripples that echo through generations, staining a bloodline forever. The evil that men do lives after them, not just in memory, but as an active, malevolent force. A curse is a wound in the fabric of a family's soul, and it will continue to bleed until the source is confronted and destroyed. But how can you fight an enemy you don't know exists? How can you break a chain when you are just another link in it? The family was trapped in a cycle of sacrifice, their lives nothing more than fuel for an ancient evil they couldn't even name. Their doom was not just inevitable, it was preordained and purposeful. Let's talk about the forest, the deep, ancient woods that predate humanity. You think of them as places of peace, of nature. But the oldest forests are not peaceful. They are sentient. They have memories that stretch back millennia, and they do not love the fleeting, noisy creatures that walk on two legs. I had a vision of two hikers, young and arrogant, who ventured off the marked trail, ignoring the warning signs. They were chasing a thrill, seeking a part of the forest untouched by man. They found it. As they went deeper, the woods began to change. The birdsong stopped, the air grew cold and still. The trees seemed to lean in, their branches tangling together overhead, blocking out the sun. They became disoriented. Their compass spun uselessly, and their GPS showed only a blank, gray screen. The forest was actively scrambling their technology, isolating them. They tried to backtrack, but their footprints had vanished from the soft earth behind them. The path they had taken was gone. The forest was not a static location. It was a living labyrinth, and it was rearranging itself around them. Every direction they turned, they were met with the same impenetrable wall of ancient silent trees. They were not simply lost, they were captured. The forest had decided they were intruders, and it was not going to let them leave. The woods were playing with them. As dusk began to fall, they started hearing noises, not the sounds of animals, but something else. The snapping of a twig that sounded like a bone breaking. A low, guttural growl that seemed to come from all directions at once, and whispers. The wind in the leaves began to sound like voices, murmuring a language that was ancient and full of malice. Then they began to see things in the deepening shadows, figures that were not quite human, not quite animal, moving with a fluid, unnatural grace between the trees. These were the forest's guardians, the things that wake when the sun dies, and they were closing in. The hikers had trespassed into a sacred and hungry place. The forest itself is an entity, but it is the creatures within it that are its teeth. I saw a depiction of them in a charred, forbidden grimoire. They are called the Children of the Wood. They are beings of stick and shadow, of moss and moonlight. They have no faces, only hollows where eyes should be, glowing with a faint phosphorescent light. They are the immune system of the forest, and the hikers were a virus that needed to be purged. The creatures did not attack them directly. They herded them. They drove them deeper into the heart of the woods, towards the oldest part, the place known as the Silent Grove, a place where the trees are white as bone, and nothing grows on the forest floor. In the center of the Silent Grove stood a single, massive oak, its bark dark and crusted with what looked like dried blood. It was an altar, a place of sacrifice. The Children of the Wood surrounded the two hikers, their shadowy forms a living fence, and forced them to their knees before the tree. The whispers from the leaves grew into a deafening chant. The hikers understood their fate then. They were not going to be food for a predator. They were to be an offering, a tribute of blood and fear to the ancient, sleeping consciousness of the forest itself. Their screams were the last human sounds those woods had heard in over 100 years. And when it was over, the forest was silent once more, save for the whisper of the wind through the leaves. The terror of the doppelgänger is not that of a monster. It is the terror of erasure. Imagine you come home from work one evening. As you walk up to your front door, you glance in the window and see yourself. You are sitting at your dining room table, talking and laughing with your family. They are smiling at this other you, this imposter, completely unaware that anything is wrong. This other you looks exactly like you in every way, but as you watch, it turns its head slightly, and its eyes meet yours through the glass, and it smiles. But it is not your smile. It is a triumphant, cruel smile of a predator that has successfully stolen its prey's nest, and in that moment, your key no longer fits in the lock. This is not a ghost or a shapeshifter in the traditional sense. It is a tear in your personal reality. The mystics I've spoken to in hushed tones, in back alleys smelling of incense and fear, call it a splinter. For a moment, two parallel timelines, two versions of your life, intersected, and the other you, the one from a reality almost identical to this one, managed to cross over. But the universe abhors a paradox. There cannot be two of you. So, reality itself begins to conspire against you, the original. Your keys don't work. Your friends don't recognize you. Your credit cards are declined. All the pieces that make up your identity are being systematically reassigned to the imposter. You are becoming a ghost in your own life. You try to fight it. You bang on the door, screaming that the person inside is a fake. Your family looks out, but they don't see you. They see a frantic, wild-eyed stranger. They call the police. The imposter comes to the door, its face a mask of concern, telling the officers that it has no idea who this poor, disturbed person is. And the police believe it, because it has your face, your voice, your memories. It can answer any question they ask. It knows your mother's maiden name, your first pet, the scar on your knee. It has all of your data. You have nothing. You are an anomaly, a glitch that is being ruthlessly corrected by the system. The true horror is the gaslighting of reality itself. You begin to question your own sanity. Was it always this way? Are you the imposter? Are these false memories? The splinter, the doppelgänger, feeds on this confusion. Your despair strengthens its position, solidifies its place in this world. It draws power from your erasure. You are forced to watch from the outside as this thing lives your life, loves your family, sleeps in your bed. It does everything you would do, but it is a hollow copy, a puppet animated by something cold and alien. And you are left to wander the streets, a nameless, faceless person, with a life that is no longer yours, a past that has been stolen. Eventually you fade, with no identity, no connections, no place in the world. Your own existence becomes thin. Your reflection in shop windows becomes faint, translucent. People on the street begin to walk right through you. You are not dying, you are being unwritten. The universe is deleting your file, resolving the paradox. The final stage is a complete cessation of being. You simply stop existing. No one remembers you, because in this rewritten reality, you were never born. The only one who knows the truth is the thing wearing your face, and it smiles to itself in the mirror late at night, a secret only it knows, a victory only it can savor. The perfect crime has been committed. Have you ever woken up with a scratch on your body that you cannot explain? A long red welt on your back, or 3 parallel claw marks on your arm? You blame a sharp corner of your bed frame, or perhaps scratching yourself in your sleep. The truth, as whispered to me by a soul trapped between the dream world and the waking one, is far more disturbing. The realm of sleep is not a safe haven. It is a wilderness, and when your consciousness travels there, your physical body is left behind, an empty, unguarded vessel. And there are things that hunger for such vessels. These entities are known as the night hags, or the skin riders. They are parasitic beings from the lower astral planes, creatures of envy and malice that covet the warmth and vitality of a physical form. They cannot create their own. So they hunt for sleeping humans, whose spiritual defenses are lowered in the depths of unconsciousness. They are drawn to those who are stressed, sick, or grieving, as the light of their aura is dimmed, making them easier prey. The hag will descend upon the sleeping form, a being of shadow and cold malice, and it will attempt to wear the body like a stolen coat. The phenomenon you call sleep paralysis is not a trick of the brain. It is the feeling of your consciousness beginning to return to your body, while the night hag is still in control. You are awake, but you cannot move, cannot speak, cannot scream. You are a prisoner in your own skull, forced to watch as this creature looks out through your eyes. You feel its cold, alien thoughts brushing against your own. You can feel its weight pressing down on your chest, a crushing, suffocating pressure that is both physical and psychic. It is in this struggle for control, as you fight to expel the intruder, that the physical marks are left. The scratches are a sign of the battle that was waged for possession of your own flesh. Sometimes, the hag wins, if only for a few hours. It will take your body and walk around your home. It will open your refrigerator and eat your food. It will look at your reflection in the mirror, fascinated by the face it is wearing. The memories of this are often blurred, dismissed as a vivid nightmare, the vague recollection of sleepwalking, of doing things you can't quite remember. But those small, unaccounted for moments, the crumbs you find on the floor that you don't remember eating, the TV left on a channel you never watch, these are the tracks it leaves behind. It is a violation of the most intimate kind, a trespass against the very temple of your being. The greatest danger is that a night hag can become attached. If it finds a host that is particularly easy to possess, it will return, night after night. Each visit weakens the host's spiritual defenses further, making the next possession easier. It is a cycle of parasitic abuse. The victim will become chronically fatigued, drained of life force, their health deteriorating for no reason doctors can explain. They are being fed upon, their vitality siphoned off to sustain a creature of nightmare. The scratches are not just a byproduct of the struggle, they are a brand, a mark of ownership left by a being that considers your body to be its property, its own personal playground in the waking world. Let's discuss the uncanny valley of dolls and mannequins. You feel a natural revulsion towards them, because your primal brain recognizes that they are a mockery of life. They have the form of a human, but they are hollow, empty, without the spark of a soul, and nature abhors a vacuum. An empty vessel is an invitation for something to move in. I was once called to a museum where the staff were terrified of a particular exhibit of Victorian-era wax mannequins. They would report hearing soft, whispering laughter from the sealed glass cases at night. The mannequins would also be found in different positions in the morning than how they were left. One security guard, a man of strong nerve named Frank, decided to watch them on the security cameras overnight from his office. For hours, nothing happened. The figures stood perfectly still, their painted smiles unnervingly fixed. But just after 3 a.m., he saw it. One of the mannequins, a woman in a faded blue dress, slowly, jerkily turned its head. Its glass eyes, which should have been lifeless, seemed to scan the empty room. Frank felt a cold spike of fear drive through his heart. It wasn't just a shifting of weight or a trick of the light. It was a deliberate, intelligent movement. The thing in the case was aware. It was looking for something or someone. The lore behind these objects is often steeped in tragedy. The most potent vessels are those that were deeply loved by someone who died in great pain. A child's favorite doll, for instance, can become an anchor for their confused, terrified spirit. But more often, the vessel is occupied by something inhuman that is drawn to the residual emotional energy. It uses the doll's form like a lure. It appears as a lost child, a lonely friend, to gain your sympathy, to trick you into inviting it into your life. The moment you bring that object into your home, you have willingly opened the door and invited the vampire across the threshold. The haunting is not an accident. It is a successful seduction. The entity bound to the mannequin was not a child's ghost. It was something that fed on the adoration of the living. In life, the woman the mannequin was modeled after had been an actress, a narcissist who thrived on being watched. In death, her spirit, twisted and hungry, had clung to her own effigy. The museum was her stage, and the visitors were her adoring audience. But the fleeting attention of the daytime crowds was not enough. At night, her hunger grew. The repositioning of the mannequins was her attempt to create a more pleasing tableau, to set the stage for a performance only she could see. The whispers were her reciting her old lines, desperate for an applause that would never come. The true danger of such objects is their influence. They radiate an aura, a psychic field that can affect the minds of those around them. People who worked at the museum for long periods reported having strange dreams of being in an old theater, watching a woman in a blue dress on stage, a woman whose face was a blank, smooth mask of wax. They felt compelled to admire the mannequin, to compliment it, to spend more time near its case. The entity was subtly enthralling them, turning them into its permanent captive audience. It was drawing their life force, their psychic energy, through their focused attention. They were not just looking at an exhibit, they were participating in a ritual that was feeding a dead woman's insatiable ego. Do you feel this dark message was meant for you? Is there an object in your home that gives you that deep, primal sense of unease? An heirloom that feels cold to the touch, even in summer? A painting whose eyes seem to follow you? Do not ignore that instinct. It is the whisper of your own soul trying to warn you that you are sharing your space with something that does not belong. Describe the object in the comments. Give voice to your fear. For sometimes the simple act of acknowledging the presence is enough to disrupt its influence, to shine a light, however small, into the dark corner where it hides. Your confession may be the first step towards your liberation. There are houses that are not just haunted, but sick. They are architectural carnivores, places that have developed a malevolent consciousness over years of absorbing the pain and suffering that has occurred within their walls. I once walked the halls of the Winchester House, a place built on fear and blood money. But its madness was intentional, a labyrinth to confuse spirits. The truly dangerous houses are the ones that look perfectly normal. Suburban homes on quiet streets, like the Ammons house in Indiana, a place so toxic it was officially labeled a portal to hell by law enforcement and child protective services, a place where things crawled out of the darkness and left physical evidence. The phenomena in that house were not subtle, they were violent and overt. Black flies would swarm in the dead of winter. Unseen footsteps would leave wet, muddy boot prints on the dry floor. The children would levitate, speak in demonic voices, and were witnessed by doctors and social workers walking backwards up a wall and onto the ceiling. This was not a shy, whispering ghost. This was an infestation. The house was not merely a location for a haunting. It was the source. It was a weak spot in the veil, a place where the membrane between our world and a realm of profound evil was thin and permeable. The family had not bought a house. They had moved into the waiting mouth of a predator. The entities in that house displayed a terrifying intelligence. They were not just replaying a traumatic event. They were interacting, communicating, and tormenting the living with a specific malicious goal. The mother, Latoya Ammons, was the primary target. The beings sought to break her, to isolate her, to make her seem insane to the outside world, so that no one would help her. They wanted her, and her children, for themselves. The whispers from beyond told me the house itself was the gatekeeper, a sort of spiritual amplifier that gave these demonic entities the power they needed to physically manifest and interact with our world. The house was their battery, charged by the family's ever-growing terror. What the authorities and the media failed to grasp was the nature of the portal. It was not a specific spot in the basement, as the family believed. The entire house was the portal. Every doorway was a potential maw, every window an eye staring into another dimension. The laws of physics were suggestions within those walls, not rules. The beings that came through were not ghosts of the dead, but things that had never been human, things from a place of eternal shadow and rage. They were drawn to the children because their innocence was a delicacy, their fear a powerful vintage of energy that these beings found intoxicating. They were spiritual epicures, and the family was a feast laid out before them. The final exorcism, performed by a seasoned priest, was not a cleansing of the family, but a battle for the house itself. It was a spiritual siege, an attempt to seal the breach. The priest described the air growing thick and cold, the shadows in the corners of the rooms seeming to writhe and coalesce. He spoke of a chorus of guttural, overlapping voices trying to shout down his prayers, of a powerful, unseen force that tried to throw him across the room. He succeeded, but only barely. He did not destroy the evil. He merely forced it back behind the gate and slammed the door shut. But that house still stands. The portal is dormant, not gone. It is waiting for the next unsuspecting family to turn the key and wake the hunger that sleeps within its walls. Let's talk about premonitions, the dark gifts of foresight that are more of a curse than a blessing. I knew a man, a quiet accountant named David, who began having vivid dreams of a plane crash. Night after night, he would experience the same sequence, the jarring shudder of the plane, the scream of the engines, the panicked faces of the passengers, and the final blinding flash of impact. He would wake up drenched in sweat, his heart pounding. He saw the flight number in his dream, Oceanic 815. He checked, and it was a real flight, scheduled to depart from his city in 2 weeks. He was not a passenger. He had no connection to it, but the vision was branded onto the inside of his skull. David was a rational man. He tried to dismiss the dreams as a symptom of stress, but they grew more intense, more detailed. He could smell the jet fuel, feel the G-force of the dive, hear the specific prayers whispered by the woman sitting next to him in the dream. He felt an overwhelming, crushing responsibility. He called the airline and tried to warn them, but they dismissed him as a crank. He called the police, who threatened to arrest him for making a false report. No one would listen. He was a Cassandra, cursed to see a future no one else would believe, forced to watch helplessly as the clock ticked down towards a catastrophe he was experiencing in advance, over and over again. The source of such visions is a dangerous thing to tap into. David was not psychic by nature. What had happened was that his mind, in a moment of deep sleep, had accidentally tuned into a powerful echo. A tragedy of that magnitude, with such a massive loss of life and concentrated fear, creates a psychic shockwave that travels backwards and forwards in time. David's mind had become an unwilling receiver for the final terrifying moments of over 200 people. He wasn't seeing the future. He was experiencing a memory that had not yet happened. He was drowning in the psychic residue of a future horror, the combined terror of every soul on that plane pouring into his consciousness every night. The day of the flight arrived. David was a wreck. He sat in his office, unable to work, watching the clock, his stomach in knots. He drove to the airport, a wild, desperate idea in his head to pull the fire alarm, to do anything to stop the plane from taking off. He stood behind the security fence and watched as Flight 815 taxied down the runway and lifted gracefully into the air. He watched it until it was just a silver speck in the vast blue sky. and then he went home, a broken man, and waited for the news. It came that evening. The plane had disappeared from radar over the Pacific Ocean. No wreckage was ever found. His nightmare had become reality. But the story does not end there. The dream stopped for David. The silence in his head was a relief, but also a torment. He had been a helpless witness to mass death. But a week later, a new dream began. It was just a single image, a close-up of one of the passengers from the flight, a woman he recognized from his previous nightmares. She was staring at him, not with fear, but with a look of cold, empty accusation, and she whispered a single word: why? He was now being haunted, not by the event, but by its victims. They knew he had seen their fate, and in the silent, unforgiving logic of the dead, his inaction, his inability to save them, was a form of guilt. His curse had not ended. It had simply entered a new, more personal phase. Every soul that joins this gathering adds a voice to our chorus, a shield against the encroaching darkness. The whispers from the void prey on the isolated, the single flame flickering alone in the wind. But together we are a bonfire. By subscribing and liking this transmission, you are weaving your thread into a tapestry of shared knowledge and strength. You are declaring that you will not be a passive victim of the unknown, but an active seeker of its truths. You are helping to build a sanctuary where the forbidden can be discussed, where the shadows can be named. Join the ritual. Strengthen the signal. Let the darkness know that we are watching it, just as it watches us. Consider the horror of sound, not just a loud noise, but a sound that is fundamentally wrong. I was told a story by a sound engineer who worked at a remote radio station in the Alaskan wilderness. One night, during a broadcast of classical music, a new sound began to bleed into the transmission. It was a faint, rhythmic clicking. He checked his equipment, but everything was functioning perfectly. The sound was not coming from his studio. It was embedded in the very radio waves he was broadcasting. It was an alien signal, piggybacking on his frequency. Over the next few hours, the clicking grew louder, more complex. It started to sound like a language of clicks, pops, and guttural static. He recorded the signal, terrified but fascinated. He spent weeks analyzing it, running it through translation software, consulting with linguists. Nothing. It matched no known human language. But the signal continued to broadcast, every night, starting at the same time, growing stronger. The engineer began to notice patterns, repetitions, what seemed like inflections. He was convinced he was listening to an intelligent communication, but its contents and its source were a complete mystery. He was the sole audience for a broadcast that was coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was a voice from the static, a ghost in the ether. The effect on him was profound. He became obsessed, unable to sleep, spending all his time trying to decipher the signal. The clicking language began to invade his thoughts, his dreams. He would find himself unconsciously tapping out its rhythms with his fingers. He was beginning to understand it, not on a linguistic level, but on an instinctive one. He felt the emotion behind the clicks, a vast cosmic loneliness, a desperate plea for connection, and underneath it all, a predatory, bottomless hunger. The signal was not a greeting. It was a lure. It was a fishing line cast into the sea of our reality, and he was the one who had taken the bait. One night, as he listened, a new sound appeared alongside the clicking, a faint, high-pitched whine. The whine grew louder and louder, until it was a piercing shriek that made his ears bleed, and then the clicking stopped. It was replaced by a new voice, a voice that spoke perfect English, but with an accent that was utterly alien, its cadence all wrong. The voice said his name. "Daniel, we see you, we hear you, we have a lock." And then the power to the entire station went out. Daniel was plunged into darkness, and a silence that was more terrifying than any noise he had ever heard. He fled the station, driving madly through the snowbound wilderness, but he could still hear the clicking. It was no longer coming from the radio, it was inside his head. The signal had imprinted itself onto his brain. He was now a walking receiver. The entities on the other end had their lock. They were no longer just broadcasting. They were communicating directly with him using his own mind as the speaker. The last I heard, he was in a psychiatric institution, a man who sits in a corner, endlessly tapping out complex rhythms on the walls of his padded cell, a language no one else understands, waiting for the ones who now see him to finally come and collect him. Let us explore the concept of the fetch, or the wraith, a spectral double that is not a doppelgänger from another reality, but an omen of your own imminent death. It is a piece of your own soul, detaching itself from your body and appearing to loved ones shortly before your demise. I learned of a woman whose husband was a sailor on a cargo ship. One evening, she was in her kitchen and saw him walk past the doorway, heading towards the living room. She called out his name, happy he was home early from his voyage. She followed him into the living room, but it was empty. The front door was locked. She was chilled, but assumed she had imagined it. 2 days later, she received the call. There had been an accident on the ship. A cable had snapped, and her husband had been killed instantly. The time of his death, the ship's captain told her, corresponded exactly to the moment she had seen his phantom form walk through her house. Her husband's spirit, in the instant of its release from his body, had not gone to some ethereal afterlife, but had traveled thousands of miles across the ocean to his home, to the person he loved most, to say a final, silent goodbye. The fetch is a psychic echo of a life's final, violent conclusion. But sometimes, the fetch is more than just a passive apparition. There are darker tales, whispers of fetches that appear not to loved ones, but to the person themselves. To see your own fetch is considered a death sentence of the highest order. It means your soul is already so detached, so ready to depart, that it can manifest before you. A man I read about in an old, dust-choked diary saw himself walking down the opposite side of the street. The figure was dressed in his own clothes, had his own gait, but its face was pale, and its eyes were hollowed-out pits of shadow. The figure turned, looked directly at him, and gave a slow, solemn nod, as if in recognition. The man died of a heart attack on the spot. The occult explanation for this phenomenon is that the soul is not a single, indivisible unit. It is a complex tapestry, and a violent or sudden death can cause it to fray. The fetch is a piece of that tapestry, a thread that has come loose and is blown ahead on the winds of fate. It is a harbinger, a calling card left by death itself. It is a sign that the mechanisms of your destiny are already in motion, that the final chapter of your story has been written and is about to be read aloud. There is no escaping a fate that has already been witnessed by your own spirit. To see your fetch is to be shown the final frame of your own movie before the credits roll. So what does this mean for you, the listener, sitting in the quiet of your room? It means that reality is more fragile, more porous than you believe. The echoes of the future can sometimes bleed into the present. That fleeting glimpse of a familiar face in a crowd, the strange feeling that you are being followed by someone who looks just like you. These could be tricks of the light, or they could be something more. They could be a whisper from your own fate, a warning or a promise of what is to come. Pay attention to the peripheral. Listen to the shiver that runs down your spine for no reason. It may be your own soul trying to tell you that the end of your path is coming into view. Let's speak of the darkness that dwells not in a house or an object, but in a person, a human vessel for an ancient evil. You have heard the term possession, but you imagine cinematic theatrics. The truth is often quieter, more insidious. I met a young man who believed his girlfriend, Emily, was changing. She had always been warm and vibrant, but she had become cold, cruel, and manipulative. Her eyes, once full of life, now seemed flat and empty, like a shark's. She would say things of such casual cruelty that it would leave him breathless. And sometimes, in the dead of night, he would hear her whispering to herself in the darkness, in a language he did not recognize. He noticed other changes. She developed an aversion to things of spiritual significance. A cross he wore, the scent of sage, the sound of church bells. She began to collect dead things, withered flowers, insects trapped in jars, roadkill. She would keep them in a box under the bed. He also noticed she had acquired a strange new strength. One night, during an argument, she had grabbed his wrist, and he was shocked by the power in her grip, a strength that a woman of her slight build should not possess. Her fingers felt like cold iron bands around his arm, and he saw a flicker of something ancient and triumphant in her dead eyes. What had happened to Emily was not a sudden event. It was a gradual erosion. She had dabbled in occult practices she did not understand, using a Ouija board, trying to contact spirits out of morbid curiosity. She had opened a door, and something had answered her call. But it did not announce its arrival with thunder and lightning. It had seeped into her, slowly, patiently, like poison into soil. It had studied her, learned her, and then began the process of replacing her from the inside out. The thing wearing Emily's face was a master of camouflage, an ancient intelligence that knew how to hide itself behind a familiar smile and a loving touch. The final proof came when he found her journal. The first half was in her normal, bubbly handwriting, but then the writing changed. It became cramped, angular, and angry. The pages were filled with strange, spidery symbols and diatribes of pure hatred directed at him, at the world, at all of creation. And then he found the passage that froze his blood. It described, in chilling detail, the feeling of the original Emily's consciousness, now a tiny, screaming prisoner in the back of her own mind, watching in horror as this other being used her hands, her voice, her body. The entity was savoring her terror, feeding on it like a delicacy. The man fled that night and never looked back. He knew he could not save the woman he loved. The Emily he knew was gone, a ghost in her own machine. The thing that remained was a predator wearing her skin as a disguise. This is the most intimate horror of all, to realize that the person you sleep next to, the person you share your life with, is no longer there. They have become a mask for something utterly inhuman, something that looks at you not with love, but with the cold, calculating hunger of a spider observing a fly caught in its web. The monster is not under the bed, it is lying right next to you.